I'm going to go ahead and start up. Thank you so much for joining us today for our session. My name is Stephanie Rodriguez, and I'm the Assistant Director of the Federal Housing Programs with the San Antonio Housing Authority. And I have the pleasure of moderating this session to discuss resident safety. And it's one of our outcomes for the San Antonio Housing Authority. We will be discussing what safety means when it comes to housing and how we can help our residents to feel safe in their homes. Safety has many meanings, and it's not only related to crime and policing. Based on surveys and discussions with our residents at the San Antonio Housing Authority, feeling safe can also mean feeling comfortable in your neighborhood and knowing your neighbors, having supportive services for mental and physical health needs, and feeling financially stable, or having access to different opportunities and resources, and knowing how to get those resources. It is also having a better understanding of their rights and options available to them when making a decision that could affect their livelihood. We have identified a few strategies to address improving safety for our residents, such as continued partnerships with the San Antonio Police Department and Fire Department to, get some of those emergency needs or patrolling, increasing community involvement and open communication channels without fear of retaliation. And this goes across the board for like our residents, our partners, anybody to get that community input. Providing resources and information to empower residents to be able to advocate for themselves or for others in their community, and property assessments to identify vulnerabilities, addressing security and maintenance concerns in a timely manner, and kind of assessing our properties and what may be needed in order to make them the safer or meet some certain safety requirements. I have some community partners here with me today, and they're going to help drive that conversation. So we're going to go ahead and have everybody introduce themselves. If you can tell me a little bit, or our audience, about your organization and what you kind of focus on. So I'm going to go ahead and start with Mr. Domingo Ibarra.
Good afternoon. I am Domingo Ibarra, the Director of Security for SAHA. I'm retired law enforcement, so I bring 40 years of experience in collaborating and cooperating with different community partners.
Okay, and then if we could go ahead and go to Ms. Temes.
Hi, my name is Sandra Themis. I'm the Executive Director of the Fair Housing Council of Greater San Antonio. The Fair Housing Council is a private nonprofit that's funded by HUD specifically to work to promote fair housing, to ensure against discriminatory housing practices in the areas of rental housing, real estate sales, mortgage lending, homeowners insurance, design and construction of new apartments, appraisal, different areas dealing with housing transactions. And the way we promote fair housing is through a series of free services to consumers that involve complaint investigation, advocacy for victims, and education now.
Thank you so much. And it is for more than just San Antonio, correct?
That's right. Thank you for that note. Originally, we only served San Antonio, hence the name Fair Housing Council of Greater San Antonio, but we've now expanded to approximately 36 counties in South Texas. The majority of our complaints, though, do arise out of Bexar County, and our office is located in Bexar County.
Thank you so much. Mr. King, if you could go ahead and introduce yourself.
Okay. My name is Cecil King. I'm a clinical director for the Center for Healthcare Services. Center for Healthcare Services is the authority for behavioral health and addiction treatment in Bexar County. My role at the center is to work to ensure that our consumers that we serve have suitable, affordable housing in the community, as well as working with them to gain employment, integrated employment in the community, as well as our veterans, military veterans peer network program that provides education and resources to veterans and their family that are in our community.
Thank you so much. And then Ms. Hickson.
Hi, my name is Jenny Hickson, and I am the Public Health Administrator for Violence Prevention with Metro Health, the Health Department. And in that role, I oversee the work that Metro is doing around a public health approach to violence prevention with our Stand Up SA violence interrupters, with our Triple P parenting program that focuses on nonviolent parenting education, the work that we're doing around domestic violence with the Collaborative Commission on Domestic Violence, and the close partnership that we have with SAPD with the crisis response team.
Thank you so much. Now, just some things for today's meeting. For those in the audience, we do have a question and answers section. If you have any questions during this webinar, our session, our panel, you can type those into the panel, and we will go ahead and answer them probably towards the end. But if any of them that I feel like we could try to address while we're having our conversation, I'll put those questions in there as well. But please, if you have any questions, please enter them in that section. So we'll go ahead and we'll get started. So we want to start off with the idea that these are strategies with the San Antonio Housing Authority for our housing recipients, residents in our areas, and those who receive assistance through us, in order for them to be able to say that they feel safe living in our properties and in our communities. And so part of that, these strategies, as we mentioned earlier, where we talked about continued partnerships, addressing community needs and having that involvement, everybody kind of has a different definition of that safety. And we want to be able to have each person say relatively well that they feel safe in their communities. So we'd like to start the conversation off with, what does it mean for you to feel safe at home? And how does your agency kind of work through those? And I'd like to hear from each of you, and whichever one of you would like to start first, I'd say that'd be great.
Okay, I can start first.
Okay.
So when we look at it from a fair housing point of view, we realize that housing very much is a human right, and where you live impacts so much about your life and your life expectancy, et cetera. And so when we're looking at safety, we're looking at not only safety in the neighborhood surrounding the property, we're looking at safety with regard to maybe the public and common use areas of the property. We're also looking at safety in the interior of the unit. And then lastly, safety when we're dealing with interactions between management and a resident, and also interactions between residents. And when we're talking about the surrounding neighborhood, I think the first thing that comes to mind is crime. And even if it's in the neighborhood and you're not the direct victim of the crime, the stress surrounding living in a high crime area can have a really detrimental toll on someone's mental health and their physical health. And so that can then lead to an impact on their life expectancy, even though they're not the ones that are the victim of the crime, but they live in a very high crime area. When we're looking at issues with the property itself, so maybe the public and common use areas of the property, we're also looking at crime itself, but we're also looking at features of the property that may be hazardous to residents, whether that be inaccessibility issues for people with mobility impairments, whether that be issues regarding health and safety related to like persistent sewage problems or trip hazards on the property when those are not properly flagged. We're also looking at lighting issues at the property, especially how that can impact some people with disabilities too, whether that's physical or mental, and are impacted by living in a property that's not properly lighted. And then when we're dealing with the interior of the property, we're thinking about health and safety issues inside, right, that affect someone's safety. So whether that be environmental hazards in the property itself, like mold, whether they don't have adequate access to safe water, whether they don't have access to proper heating or cooling in the unit, and that can impact their health as well. So we look at things like that, and it's, and then when we're dealing with even interactions between people on the property and how that can impact safety, tenants have the right to be free from any form of a harassment when they're living in a property, whether that be racial harassment or sexual harassment, et cetera. And so it's a matter of, those are issues that can impact someone's mental health and physical health. And so it's always important that these different aspects, whether it's issues with safety related to the neighborhood, whether it's the common use areas of the property, whether it's in the interior of the unit, or interactions between different people that live there or the staff on the property, to make sure that there's ways to adequately address all these different factors so that people feel safe in their unit.
Thank you. Now, speaking on when you're talking about mental health and their physical health, I think that kind of leads into Mr. King and your team on how, you kind of work with our residents and those in the San Antonio area when dealing with how they feel safe, especially when it comes to like their mental health.
Yes, you are correct. Ms. Sandra, you hit a lot of key points when it comes to safety. Safety is a whole gamut of different type of things, and you have touched on, several of them. I like to add to that safety. When it comes to safety, it differs with who you're dealing with. Because take, for instance, folks that deal with mental illness, it's things that maybe seems to be unsafe for them, whereas someone without mental illness would be, oh, no, that's okay, that's safe, that's not. Um, Dealing with mental illness, you got to remember that that is a part of their illness. And, working with those individuals, providing the support that they need to be able to distinguish between safe and unsafe situation, those are also key pieces to help them through their journey of recovery. Um, Continuing with safety for me is an ongoing thing. And it's everybody's job. It's not just the property manager jobs or the security force, law enforcement force that's on property, that's patrolling the property. It's the resident's responsibility as well. It's the community's responsibility. So I'm a firm believer is when it comes to safety, if you see something or you hear something, say something. You remember the old saying, they said it takes a village to raise a child. Well, it's the same concept when you're dealing with safety in a community. Everybody in that community play a key role when it comes to, ensuring that that community that they're residing in is safe. Safety on the exterior as well as the interior part of their home, and want to work cohesively with everybody in that community to make sure that there is a safe, environment and everybody feels happy. You have to be happy with where you live. And if you're not safe and don't feel safe, you're not going to be happy. And if you're not happy, it can also play a real, negative impact on your mental health or your medical, illness or whatever it is that you're going through. It plays a great deal of stress on that individual. So safety is an ongoing job for everyone. It is first and always will be first priority.
Oh, wow. Let me jump in here for a second because I'm so happy that Cecil got us off to such a great start. And Sandra, thank you for making the comments about crime in the area. It's important for us to recognize that Cecil is absolutely 100% right. It is a community getting involved, so it does take a village. The managers can't be at all places at all times. At SAHA Security, what we do is we created a lot of data streams where we actually are able to harvest information. It's called situational awareness. We need to know how many people called the police department the night before. Where specifically were they dispatched to the police department? We need to know the nature of the call. We need to know any kind of information that was provided to SAPD. But what's important for us to understand is that a lot of people don't call, and they might very well think that somebody else will call, but it's that critical piece of information. I like to describe this as a puzzle. There's always a missing piece to the puzzle that can help us realize in a clear picture of what it is that's important. Tragically, we have a lot of people that come onto our properties and they're not authorized to be there. But when people don't report this, those individuals start to feel safe. So Cecil is absolutely right. When they feel safe, then they feel like nobody's watching and nobody cares. So Sandra's point, there's crime in the community, and it's all available online. If you want to go to SAPD calls for service, you can actually see in the last 7 days who called and when they called and what they called about. What we do is we actually track that and we start identifying the top 10 properties that require our attention. So it's always beneficial for us to work in concert with all of our service providers. So every one of you brings a critical component to this narrative.
Thank you for that. Now, one thing that you touched on too was talking about the crime that's in the area, reporting what you see. But at the same time, it could be that, if somebody's being a victim and they're not reporting it themselves, in order to try to help that family. And that kind of goes, I think, into Ms. Hickson. with what you guys do for your family services and how you help people that are victims of domestic violence, whether they're female or male.
Absolutely. And I think one of the favorite things that I've seen in a group that was working on gender equality was human rights starts at home, because we know that the most dangerous relationship that women have is with their intimate partners. That's where the relationship that's most likely to result in murder for women. And so when we're thinking about safety from a public health perspective, we have kind of two components. There's the interpersonal relationships and feeling safe in that relationship, not just physically, but also emotionally, because a lot of abuse that occurs in relationships is not physical, it's emotional abuse or financial abuse. But then there's also the safety in the broader community sense, meaning that if you are in an unsafe relationship, do you have access to jobs with fair wages so that you can choose to live on your own and you can find housing that you can afford? That's very much a part of safety, because if you don't have options, then you can't make choices to get yourself into a safer situation. And I think especially for the concept of, do people seek help, whether from law enforcement or other agencies, the reasons why people don't seek help, especially in intimate partner violence, are very complex. If they're financially dependent on their partner, if they share children with their partner, if they don't want to lose the income that partner has, and they're concerned if they call law enforcement that that person's going to go to jail and they're going to lose that income. There are a lot of reasons why people don't seek the help that we, a lot of times we think, people should seek help in this way. And there's a lot of reasons why people don't. And a lot of times those reasons are very logical reasons if you are able to kind of unpack the whole story. So I think what the work that we're trying to do is work with all of our community partners through the Collaborative Commission on Domestic Violence, and CHCS is part of that, to think about how we can change our systems so that all of the folks that are needing help can access that help in a way that they find comfortable for them, that they find is accessible, and that we're not putting additional barriers in front of people who are living in dangerous homes by saying that they can only access help and these few prescribed ways that we've decided are the ways that we think are okay for them. So that's something that we're continuing to work on. And of course, people can always call us APD, and the crisis response teams are available to help people work through that family violence situation. But we also have alternative ways that people can get assistance through some of our great partners.
Thank you so much. Now, different things that you touched on, we talk about the safety and mental health, how to reach out and getting those resources. And so I think a big part that we look at in the sense of a lot of people talk about safety is the property itself. So I'm kind of going to go into with Mr. Domingo Ibarra, if you could go over kind of how we do property assessments for vulnerability, to kind of touch on like the way it looks for lighting, for the way the property is set up, landscaping that might be affected in order to go with to fix it for better safety.
Excellent. Thank you for the opportunity. We have what's called the vulnerability assessment, which basically it brings best practices. So we have a cadre of different issues that we look at. When you first approach a property, think about perimeter control. Is there sufficient lighting? Now what we have in the 21st century is LED lights. So when you have some of the old halogen lights, they tend to not light as well. And it's always important because when you have dark spots, there's a lot of individuals that feel safe coming onto our property, which in point of fact, they're trespassing. The other thing I look at is, do we have any fences? Some properties do not lend themselves to fences. And I would say like Alasan, it's got a very large footprint. Whereas other properties like on the east side of San Antonio, we've got much smaller properties. And these actually do lend themselves to fencing. But what's important is whenever you have people that actually come on to the property, sometimes they're guests, sometimes they're visitors. And if you don't mind, I'm going to interject a question here, Stephanie. Very good question that we just got. Is the property manager still reliable when reporting to them that other residents are doing some type of criminal activity that include them as well as their guests? That's a powerful opportunity for us to say, Cecil's point, we are a village. The manager basically is the person that is responsible for that property. So when you notify the manager that there's an issue, it actually gives me an opportunity to focus because we do, you're going to see an alphabet soup. So pardon me for this with SAPD. They have what's called a CFS, a call for service. When I go to a property, and I'm doing one of these assessments, one of the things I look at is what is the crime rate? And we're looking at 3 categories. We're looking at violent crime, which has subcategories, which includes what Jenny was talking about. Are there any issues of family violence there? And the reason that's important is that even though it's families that are sometimes having difficulties in getting along, it's still a patrol car. You see 2 patrol cars, sometimes 3 patrol cars. So that goes back to the very heart of what we're talking about, fear of crime. If you're always seeing a patrol car there, is that a bad thing? Sometimes it can be. Other times it means that we are working as what Cecil is describing, the village. So the more attention you bring to the property by reporting it to the manager, in my opinion, is the nucleus of that property, the better chance we have to drill down on 2 pieces of critical information that I look at during these vulnerability assessments. Number 1, empirical evidence. Those are just basically how many times was SAPD called there in the past 30 days, in the past 24 hours, in the past year. We actually have a number so we can give ourselves a baseline where we're at as it relates to either violent crime or property crime, or sometimes even other issues like trespassing. And number 2, and this is, in my opinion, the most important one, anecdotal information. There's a lot of people that can actually tell the manager, because they know these individuals, they're neighbors, they can give us information, and it can and should be anonymous. And we maintain that anonymity throughout the whole process. But when you're actually giving us that kind of information, it gives us an opportunity to say, this is a candidate for a service provider, sort of like what Jenny brings to the table, or Sandra. Cecil, he was making reference to some mental health issues. We're not trying to criminalize mental health, but we are trying to find our partners that are going to help us resolve some of these issues. This is why in that vulnerability assessment, I have some specific criteria that we address problem-solving initiatives, but we can't do it alone.
Thank you so much. Now, one of the follow-up to that question that we kind of received was that, what happens when when you go to the property manager and they say, you saw the crime, please call the police, right? Like, let's say especially if it's like a violent crime. And so, that sometimes can make a person feel like, well, the property manager's not necessarily listening to me. But, what is the reason behind a property manager might be telling you that?
Oh, that's an excellent question. In the United States, we have this Constitution that gives us a right to due process. So when someone reports a crime, keep in mind it's the police officer that's getting information from the victim, from the complainant, from witnesses. So all crimes have got to be correlated to the Texas Penal Code, and there's specific issues that are involved here. You can't present a case to the district attorney's office unless you have the case investigated. So as you can imagine, due process does take time. But keep in mind, there's 2 components that are working here side by side simultaneously. Number 1 is the criminal act itself that's referred to SAPD, and they do the investigation. And number 2 is whether or not we have any civil issues, meaning like a lease violation that is subject to having the manager request a copy of the report. And I think it's important, Stephanie, for context. We have a data sharing agreement with SAPD where we get a copy of the actual police report. We at security work as an operations center. So it's the security operations center. So we provide that actual police report to the manager. It's their job to evaluate the facts of the case. If there was a lease violation, then I present that to Stephanie. And Stephanie, you want to elaborate on what your department does?
So whenever we do get reports, the reason we ask a lot of times for us calling the police is so that we do get that report, that it can be investigated, because we do want them to be investigated. And then at that point, once we receive the information and an investigation is occurred, then we will have those conversations with the parties that could have been reported on, either to have them address those items so that we could try to move forward. And that way they can still retain their housing, but follow the rules. And then at that point, it's, if you cannot follow the rules, then we do lease enforcement. And so that's what the property managers do. But at the same time, right, safety, in the sense of we want the property to be safe. So we do want those reports also to go in, especially when Domingo was talking about the reports that they go over, how many calls have been received at the property. Those are things that they look at. If those calls aren't being reported in, it's also harder to track in that sense. And so we do enforce the lease when we do get those reports. Now,
Stephanie, if I can interject really quick.
I was going to say, yes, that way we can go over the fair housing part that goes with that.
Yeah, well, and really it's just not just fair housing, but just landlord tenant, regardless of fair housing. Just, part of a service associated with apartment rental is the investigation of complaints from tenants. There is a responsibility on behalf of the property management on SAHA to make sure that they take seriously complaints that come from tenants, whether it's regarding crime at the property or complaint against another tenant, et cetera. You know, investigation of those complaints is a service that's supposed to be provided. So I think it would be really important and beneficial that, you know, there's communication, you know, open communication with the management to that tenant that, you know, the responsibility is not really on the tenant to report it. You know, they can make a suggestion to report it, but once it's reported to the management has a responsibility at that time to investigate, you know, that's their investigation can be limited, right? It can be limited in scope because of the fact that you're not the police, but, you know, but that's where you do get, if there is a crime, an incident report or something like that, you talk to the parties involved, and then take appropriate corrective action. So I think sometimes for tenants, they may feel that their issue is being dismissed and they're not taken seriously when a manager simply tells them to call the police, right? That's not the appropriate response that management should be taking. They should be documenting that complaint and taking appropriate action to investigate it, because that is a service, just like repairs are a service that's a part of apartment rental. So is the investigation complaints from tenants. So I think, you know, one of the things in the Q&A was, you know, are they reliable or liable, right? So there is responsibility there. And even from a fair housing point of view, it's the fair housing angle of it is when the harassment of the crime, et cetera, is motivated by race or motivated by sex or one of the protected classes. But regardless, fair housing or not, discrimination or not, the responsibility is there with the management.
Thank you so
Well,
much.
Stephanie, we just got a powerful question, and I'm eager to jump on that one. I don't know if you had a chance to. They're talking about understanding that the property manager cannot be at all places. I'm going to skip down to the actual question itself. It's is there an opportunity for these resident groups to work alongside with neighborhood associations? Powerful, and the answer is yes. Sandra, you're right. It's not the responsibility of every resident to call the police department every time. However, on the flip side of that, Cecil's point was we are a village. So when we do get notified that there was a crime, one of the things that happens is, and there's two different sides to this as well, is you have communities that organize and then you have communities that mobilize. And there's a real clear difference. When you mobilize, that means that something happened that got everybody so upset, they're outraged, we want something done. Yet you start drilling down and asking, well, what is it that's happening here? And the clear picture is not there. When you organize, that's specifically what this individual is asking about, is we work as a team. We're asking for resident councils. So that's basically, you're telling us, what is it that is helping? What is it that is not as sufficient as you feel it needs to be? Fear of crime. That's the initial question that we're trying to address right now. Well, fear of crime is driven by so many different things. Like we just said, the dark spots, sometimes it's someone playing loud music, sometimes it's how many times you see a police officer. But what this individual is actually getting at, which is why I'm so excited, is imagine this. If we have a collection of organizations that come together, because it's not just the property we're talking about, it's a school across the street, it might be the convenience store. So you've got businesses, you've got neighborhood, it's even faith-based organizations. When we all come to the table and we talk about possible strategies, initiatives, this is where we're able to work better with the police department. And there's a concept that's about 25 to 30 years old now, community policing. So Cecil's point, it's actually us working as a community to police, not necessarily the what's called law and order side of it, but the kind of community police department that's more sensitive to the needs of the individual issues or the residents. If it is a mental health issue, then let's start working with Cecil and his organization. If it is a family violence issue, that person is not calling the police, but you're hearing the arguments and the screaming and the slamming of the doors. Jenny has a lot of experience that she brings to the table. So thank you for that powerful question.
No, part of that question too, though, they talked about residents being able to engage with each other, right? And so part of it, and it is part of our strategies where we talk a lot about improving like community involvement and open communication channels. And so this would be something that we could try to do together, having more community meetings in order for you to kind of get to know your neighbors. Who are your neighbors? who's at the property staff, and that way you know who you kind of have that conversation with, and being able to have those conversations without fear of, oh well, they're just going to get mad at me for reporting that. We don't want that, right? We want to be everybody to come to the table, and then that further goes into how we want to be able to bring communities together like this, in a sense where, with the changing environment, right? With COVID, how things are kind of moving. Not everybody's going to be able to gather together to be safe. And so then having different opportunities for the community to work together in like a virtual sense, but still being able to bring them together at that table and have those conversations, focusing on, hey, this is what was reported within the last month. Are there any concerns on the property that anybody's seen? And bringing that to the property management level. But also sometimes, right, when you have those conversations, there's stuff that you might not necessarily feel like you can talk about, in the sense of, like, let's say from Ms. Hickson in the group that you kind of work with, those victims of domestic violence. What kind of ways can we get them to be able to talk with management or whoever might be able to assist them, like community resources, so that they could get the care that they need in order for them to feel safe?
That's an excellent point there, Stephanie. Having those community meetings, community gatherings, and having residents being on those type of committees drives a lot of weight, because when you do that, you're kind of instilling ownership into those residents, ownership in the sense of where they live. Once they feel that sense of ownership, there is an increase in pride. There's an increase in work in terms of, hey, this is my home. This is what I want my home to look like. This is what I want my community to look like. So having those type of, community gatherings are key, and it helps a lot to revitalize that community.
Thank you, Cecil. Matter of fact, I want to add to the ownership, and that's the relationship. When you have these, what I like to call safety socials, people actually come together. And right now, even though it's virtual, like I just met Jenny and Sandra and Cecil, but I feel like at least I understand their organization and their level of passion. We had several discussions about what motivates you. Well, our residents, our neighbors, our visitors, our staff are no different. Those people coming together to have this opportunity to talk forms relationships, which builds trust. Once you have trust, then we no longer have the suspicion of bad intent. What we have here is what I like to call, let's work on 20 ways to get this resolved, not 20 reasons why we can't.
I'd like to go ahead and have Miss Jenny talk about her services and how it relates.
Yeah, and I think I saw one of the questions is from one of the partners with our stand-up team, WestCare. So I just wanted to kind of share a little bit about what our violence interrupters do, because I think this really relates to how community can, take the concept of safety and it's a community property that everybody works towards creating. So stand-up is a violence interrupter program where we have trained folks that go out, and when there's a shooting or a violent incident, they go out and they talk to the survivors of the incident, the family members of whoever was shot, the community around it, because the truth is that a lot of the crime that happens, this interpersonal, is between people that already know each other, and people in the community they know what happened. And so instead of only coming at it from we need to call the police all the time, which, is definitely part of that, Stand Up also looks at how they can work with people as individuals to support, to say, like, let's not retaliate on this. Let's find some other ways to seek justice. Let's find some sort of restorative justice practices that we can put into place to sort of start healing and building resiliency into these issues, creating sort of these moments that have terrible things happen in community, also be an opportunity to build community and build healing around them. So I know our stand-up team would love to sort of work with any folks that are interested in doing that kind of work on the east side. We're starting a new west side team, but really sort of using that model of sort of building community around these things as a long-term solution to solving them.
Thank you so much. And yeah, talking about building that community and also getting them those resources. I know with Mr. King, with your team, when you're working with those that have the mental health issues or they need that extra services, I know you've partnered with us before on helping citizens with that. What other services that might be available to somebody, especially if they're not necessarily feeling safe, but it has also to do with that mental health issue?
Okay, the Center for Healthcare Services, we run a very robust supported housing program, consists of a team of 8 care managers who work with these individuals on an individual basis inside their home or outside their home. Now, due to COVID, we're primarily doing, a lot of what we do now is being telephonic, but we do have some of those individuals who need that direct face-to-face contact, and we do provide those services, but keeping social distance at the forefront. And in doing that, the type of services that we provide, folks with mental illness, okay, they're considered one of the most vulnerable people in our community, okay? And they come with a lot of different challenges, whether it's mental health issues, medical issues, addiction issues, criminal background issues, rental issues, finance issues, you name it, they have them, okay? Our team are specialized to work with that population to give them the type of support and services that they need to be successful. The service entails by working with those individuals side by side to choose and select and get the type of housing unit that is appropriate for them. Some place where they'll feel safe, where it's affordable to them based on whatever income that they have. In addition to helping them to secure those type of units, we provide services to them inside that home that addresses their skill deficit areas. A lot of them don't know how to cook. They don't know how to manage their money. They don't know how to pay bills. They don't know how to identify safety issues and what to do when you identify those things. We provide those one-on-one skill training to them to help them to get to a point where they can live a meaningful life in the community without the support moving forward. And by doing those type of services, what we found is that 89 to 92% of our clients are achieving housing stability. Services are provided to them based on their level of care. Some of them may need to be seen weekly. Some may need to be seen twice a month. Some may need to be seen once a month. But we will always make sure to see these individuals at least once a month and address those areas that once were a problem area for them, to give them that type of support that they need. And in that line, for me, housing for me, when it comes to housing, I always try to put that on top of the pyramid when it comes to recovery. Okay, when it comes to recovery, if you help an individual to get into a safe and decent place so that they can call home, you provide a sense of hope to that individual. And that sense of hope is telling this individual that yes, recovery is possible. Recovery from mental illness, recovery from addiction, recovery from medical issues, recovery from homelessness. It is possible for you to recover and live a meaningful life. And once they have that sense of hope, then that healing process can begin. Now I can heal. I can heal and I can move forward. I can create a new path to, in life for myself and my family. And I can do all those other things that once I didn't think was possible for me to do, because now I'm in treatment for my recovery. I have the right support system that is gathered around me and helping me to travel that pathway. So it's something that's very dear to me. And when you have those individuals that are gaining the skill sets and getting those needs met, you're creating change in the community. You're creating positive changes in the community. Because once those changes take places, these individuals can get jobs. They can go and get successful jobs. They can go to school. They can tend to their children, their family better, and provide the support that they weren't able to do before the recovery process started.
Thank you so much for that. Now we actually have, we're getting close to the end of our session. We have about 20 minutes left, but we actually have quite a few questions. I'm going to see if I can go through some of these questions, and then we might circle back to some other items. So let me kind of start with one question was, how can I feel safe when SAHA limits residents, meaning the amount given to find apartments then that are able to meet the criteria of the apartment I would like to live in? So there are actually a couple different sessions that have occurred today. One of them was about the affordable, having quality affordable housing, and increasing that, like that supply. And in this sense, right, the amounts given have requirements that are set by HUD based on a small fair market rents.
Yes.
And so those are usually set by the market. And so each area kind of has different amounts. And so the harder part on that one is hard to explain. And then that would be more for that session. But in the sense of, definitely when you're given the amounts that you search for, you're going to look at areas, and usually those are going to be based on crime, on accessibility to different items in order for you and your family to feel safe in living in that environment. And so it's kind of working through that collaboration, seeing who you can get resources from, if those amounts, and then what speaking with those caseworkers. Now, on the sense of the next question, who can I contact directly?
Stephanie, if I could just interject just for that, go back to that question.
Yes, go ahead.
I think that question fits in here because how are you able to move out of a high crime area if your voucher payment standard doesn't allow you to, right? So I think that does fit here in the sense that SAHA has a responsibility to firmly further fair housing. Part of the fair housing issue involved here is the fact that a really low voucher payment standard can restrict people to only certain areas of our city, and restrict their housing choices. And so there's really an obligation. I think, probably Cecil will agree with me too. There's an obligation on the part of the housing authority to make sure that even though they're moved to work and have some discretion there, even though they're moved to work agency, that they are making strides to be closer to the small area fair market rent rule, to move closer to that so that people are given more choice and are able to move to parts of the city that are not as high in terms of crime and poverty, and just provide more opportunity. And so I think that's part of it. I think, part of you feeling safe is, what are my housing options if I'm on a voucher and I'm restricted to a particular price rent range, right? So I think that that's key to how do you feel safe when your options are very limited. So I think that's why I was like, I just wanted to interject, because I do think it very much fits here. If you know that your housing choices are going to be restricted to only certain parts of the city where it's high poverty, high crime, et cetera.
Excellent point. And yes, I am in agreement with that. I think when you talk about safety, then there cannot be any restriction when it comes to providing the subsidy that folks need to move into a safer neighborhood and area that they will feel safe for. So yes, Sandra, I am also have that belief too, that needs to happen. If we're going to talk about safety and we're making safety be the driving point of this discussion, then we also need to take a look at that fair market rate that's out there, and try to realize that what the voucher shopping allowance that are being approved for units, it makes it very, very, very difficult for folks that have challenges to find safe and decent place to live, because those safe and decent places will not accept that low market rate.
And Cecil's advocated for a long time. So have other housing advocates, along with myself, for a long time for SAHA to, maybe, even though they do have that discretion to aim higher, right? To aim higher so that it allows some more housing choices for these voucher holders so that they're not segregated to only certain parts of the city.
Now, one of the things for that group, there is a group that live in the responses for live in quality housing. That is part of the items that they're also looking at, because all of our outcomes are somewhat connected. And so we are overlapping. So like I try to assist with that group, or some other, respondents kind of overlap. And we do have where each person might be a part of that group as well. And so they're kind of covering the voucher amounts and like being able to search and what's available to them as a part of that group as well. And so that's why on ours, we give them information that comes from this meeting. So then we had one that says, who can I contact directly when I felt the property manager is not worried about what's going on? So it depends on the properties. And so for SAHA, right, for the properties that are managed by our property managers, those should all be, come through. If they don't answer those, then you're more than welcome to email up our customer service team, myself, if you had issues at the property, and we try to look into those. Now, when there's Section 8 landlords, you can report them to the caseworker that you work with on items, trying to work with either their corporate company that works for those. But, Ms. Tamez, is there any other options that somebody might have if that property is not being able to answer those questions for them, or may have answered the security questions?
I think certainly if a resident has issues regarding problems with the management, there are certain housing groups that they can call. If the city has its own housing counseling program or kind of mediation service, there's legal aid. There's also our office. If you feel that, we only deal with housing discrimination, but if you feel that the reason behind them not taking you seriously is something related to your race, the color of your skin, because you have a disability, et cetera, you could contact our office and we provide advocacy services. Or also, if there is a health and safety issue or problem or harassment going on the property, and you are a person with a disability, whether that's physical or mental, and that living environment is having a negative impact on your disability, right? The issue that's going unaddressed, whether that be a crime issue, whether that be a mold issue or pest infestation issue, whether that be inaccessibility issues at the property and it's not going addressed, et cetera. And you have a disability that's being negatively impacted by the fact that management is not quite taking it seriously in what you believe is, seriously enough. Please feel free to reach out to our office. And because when your disability is impacted, you have additional rights under the Fair Housing Act with regard to the management's responsibility to take a closer look at that problem because it's impacting your disability.
Thank you so much. Now, we had also somebody put in it, they said they were a little bit late, but wondering whether or not security presence on each property is at night or during the day. Domingo, if I could get you to kind of cover how we normally do for our public housing properties, at least.
Sure. We have actually multiple portfolios, and in public housing, not every property has security, but every property has SAPD. And the reason for this is that we use what's called site-based management, which means that every property's got to be able to come up with a budget to be able to balance all of their needs to include security. And sometimes that's quite not practical. But what we can do, we cluster our patrols. We have 3 contracts with private security companies. So whenever someone feels a need for security, and this is why it's important to Cecil's point that we do work as a village, there might be fear of crime. The empirical evidence may not be there, meaning that there's not the level of crime, but it doesn't mean that there's not the fear of crime, especially at some of our elderly and disabled communities. So working with a manager, what usually happens is I go through Stephanie and through her boss, which is Zach, and we present the request. And if there's enough evidence for us to be able to send some security assets over there, then we do so. But the managers have got to be responsible for their budgets because these private security companies have got to be paid. This is where we come in as a security operations center. The safe officers, we have a lot of safe officers all over the city. There's about 15 per substations. I'm happy to tell you that SAHA has invested a tremendous amount of money into a crime analyst. so we can actually verify when there are issues going on. And we also invested into our own safe officer. These are police officers that work side jobs, and what they do is they help us problem solve. So if a specific property finds that they need security for a battery of different reasons, those requests can actually be made through the property manager. We also have the contact submission form online, if you want to get into that, Stephanie.
So on the submission form that we do have for the agency, if there is anything that they'd like to report, you can email in, and it goes out to different departments in order for us to have it assessed. If it is crime, right, then security would normally review it. If there's ones about like services they need, we might have community development initiatives. But there is a way for anybody to report in like needs or concerns in order for them to have them addressed. And then that way we have follow-up from staff. The other part too, right, we do have for our sites, some sites actually have what we like a roving officers that every now and then do go by. We can put in a request if we say, okay, well, we notice there's a lot of activity that's been going on. And then we kind of request to see, hey, can we have either somebody patrol, or we might request with our safe officer, because we tried to build those connections to see if they're willing to see what might be able to be done, if they can patrol either at night or during the day. And we normally let them know, the time frame that we see that activity. Okay, so the next question we have, what is a resident to do when management does not address issues or brought to their attention? This is, kind of, we've been talking about it, after when you're talking with property, right, sometimes you might be talking with a leasing agent, you might be talking with a client service specialist, going up that echelon, right? If I'm not talking to the property manager, at that point though, if the property manager is not handling it, then you can move forward with the next person up, right, within that agency. Now, if it's for an outside managed development, there are definitely advocacy groups, or, reporting to your case manager if you have Section 8. If there's a possibility for them to kind of review where you're at in your voucher, but there is a different partnership that goes with Section 8. And so that one, if you wanted to leave your information later, we could try to see if we can get some contact information on how they might be able to address those concerns for you. But at least for the public housing properties, for sure, we have them go through the next people up. We have the executive leadership also kind of review those as well. So then let's see, is there a program in place with any type of security to patrol a complex, or a number of residents that can when these issues are taking place? So I would say, Domingo, do you know of any types of programs that they have other than SAPD?
Yeah, actually, there's several, and this is not unique to San Antonio, but there's like Citizens on Patrol. A lot of our residents ask about being able to establish something like that, but our legal department has some concerns about imagine a senior citizen out there with a cell phone and trying to go out there and report crime. So there's some concerns there, but I do understand many of the individual properties want to take more of a proactive role. So this comes back to what Cecil had said earlier. If you see something, say something. If one person calls, that populates in our what we call the CFS dashboard, the call for service. But when 2 people call, when 15 people call, now we're starting to see that there's a definite problem there. Those are pattern analysis. So what we're looking for is not necessarily the citizens on patrol, but we are looking for the opportunity to work in partnership with the residents. And it doesn't just affect our properties. We recognize it also affects the immediate neighborhoods. So that goes back to what Sandra was saying. It's crime in the area. We do have the opportunity to see, because we compare what happened on our property as it relates to crime or any kind of disorder, and what happened in that individual reporting district. So I would suggest and very politely imply that there's a better way than just some of these citizens on patrol. There's also like Neighbors on Watch. That's a very old program, well over 50 years. And what that basically does and says is people that are paying attention have a tendency to bring attention to the properties.
Thank you so much. Now, one of the items that we talked about was resident representation and being able to advocate for themselves. And so one of the strategies that we talked about was getting residents involved with either like leadership training, or getting them that training, that either life skills, speaking skills, in order to help them be able to advocate for themselves and others. And so I'm going to go to Ms. Tamez on that one. because I know you have a lot where you work with advocate groups, you've worked with, residents in order to kind of address those being able to speak for themselves.
Yeah, I think anytime tenants are able to come together and have a safe environment where they don't feel like, where they feel that they can be open and be free from any form of retaliation and share their concerns in an environment that's not judgmental, where there's not a housing provider, present that's going to interject or retaliate or intimidate. Really, it has to be an environment where they feel that they can freely give an opinion without being retaliated against or intimidated in some way. I've gone to community meetings before where, someone come up and then, it quickly just goes, it just disintegrates into something that's not very productive. But that allows them to be able to even choose representatives within the group, to be able to then meet with management to bring concerns to their attention. But if this is something that SAHA is looking at in terms of how to kind of make these things better, well, obviously policies are in place to say, okay, what happens once it's brought to SAHA's attention, and what will happen then, right? So it's not just giving it an opportunity to be heard, but what happens? Because some people will not want to participate if they think that it's just in name only and it won't really get them any results. So what will happen once these ideas or once these concerns are brought to SAHA's attention, if we're talking about specifically SAHA properties, and then what happens when you're not satisfied with that response, and where can that go up the chain, so to speak, like you brought up earlier, Stephanie?
Thank you so much. So actually, we do have a few more questions that are in the chat, and some of them are a little bit more on the personal level. If you guys want to provide your contact information, we could have somebody contact you on those specific items. But we are getting real close. We're at the end of our session. And so I do want to say thank you so much for everyone for being able to join. Does anybody have any closing remarks that they'd like to provide from their agency, or what initiatives that you might be having that could work towards this? I know we had a lot of discussion already, and it's actually only like a minute left.
Well, I'll just say, we are an agency that is a nonprofit, and we're an advocacy agency for tenants. So if you're a tenant on the line and you have questions about your rights, or just have a hypothetical and just want to, or make an anonymous tip, you can call our office at 210-733-3247 to report any type of complaint. We're there to provide services, housing counseling, regardless of whether or not it's a housing discrimination issue. So feel free to give us a call, and we'll at the very least give you information about guidance about your rights. And then if it's a fair housing issue, we do not charge for our services.
Thank you so much.
Although as the local mental health authority for Bexar County, we can only serve those individuals that are in our service system, but anyone else who's participant of this webinar, if you want to reach me, my office number is 210-261-1466. That's 210-261-1466. I also put it in the chat.
Thank you.
And I'm putting our email address in the website for the violence prevention program. So if anyone needs services or is looking for resources, please feel free to reach out and we'll get you connected.
Thank you so much. Now with that, I would like to say, there are still a couple other sessions that are here today. If you were interested, please join the 1:15 today. And what you would do is you'd go back to your agenda on Schedule, and you would click on that link in order to get you there. And it'll have a drop up and then the meeting invite or the streaming video. So thank you so much for everybody that was joined us today. And I think this is a great discussion to start.
Thank you all.
Thank
Everyone,
you.
Thank you.
please be safe.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.